Hey, sir. Good to see you. Hi, I'm Shane Kapler, and this is my good friend, Dr. Kevin Vost, and you're joining us for the Faith and Reasons show.
Yeah, thanks for being back with us. This is our second episode, the first one where we're going to dig into a specific topic, and today's topic is purgatory. And Shane, I recall from some years back, you wrote an article entitled "Every Christian Believes in Purgatory." And I can imagine that might raise a few eyebrows. I can probably think of some non-Catholic Christian friends who would not necessarily agree with that statement,
Sure.
or maybe some Catholic friends who wouldn't really be sure if they did or not. Is this maybe one of those outdated concepts that we cast off after the Middle Ages? So if you would fill us in here, how is it that every Christian believes in purgatory?
Well, what I meant by that in the article was every Christian who believes that we go to heaven, they will tell you that in heaven, we're free of all sin. We don't have any desire to sin in heaven. Well, okay, take a look at yourself right now. I take a look at myself. That's not me. If I were to die at this moment, I would not be free of all sin, free of all sinful desires or inclinations. So something has to change between where we are right now and who we will be in heaven. And that change, that process, other groups of Christians, they have to believe it occurs at least implicitly. We're different in heaven, but we Catholics, we give it the name purgatory, which just means a purification. And honestly, when we think about it, it's something that our souls demand. In Hebrews chapter 12, it says that we have to obtain that holiness without which no one can see God. In Revelation 21, it says no impure thing can enter the heavenly Jerusalem. And some people might say, well, what changes is our bodies. At death, we shed our bodies and our souls are pure in heaven. No, that's not what Jesus says. When we go back to the Gospels, and the Lord talks about what makes us clean or unclean, he talks about ceremonial foods and says, nothing that you put into your body can make you unclean in the sight of God, that impurity comes from the heart. Murder, theft, lust, envy, slander, that these things come out of the heart of man and they defile us. Well, our heart is what we take with us at death. And honestly, we know that there are many things within our hearts. Maybe we don't commit murder, but the seeds of murder, that anger, that judgment that we carry towards others, that's still there, and it needs to be purified.
That makes great sense to me. I wonder too, Shane, what about our Jewish brothers and sisters? Did the ancient Hebrews believe in purgatory?
Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, the ancient Hebrews, they had a concept of what's called Sheol, or the underworld, the grave. And it's something that they shared with other people. The Greeks talked about Hades, the shadowy realm where the dead go. Well, for the Hebrews, as this understanding of Sheol developed in time, they came to talk about, we read this in the book of Enoch, and it's quoted in the New Testament in the Epistle of Jude, this idea that there are actually 4 caverns in Sheol. 1 for the righteous, 3 for those at different levels of sin, different levels of the seriousness of their sin where they reside. In the generation before Jesus, the Rabbi Shammai, one of the 2 great schools of rabbinic thought, Hillel and Shammai, Shammai talked about how those Jews who died, still in need of purification, were dipped into purifying fire and made ready to join the souls of the righteous in that part of Sheol. Jesus, when he talks about Lazarus and Dives, he talks about this realm. The gospel writers use the Greek term for it, Hades, but it's Sheol, and Jesus talks about the different experiences that souls had there. The righteous are in Abraham's bosom, but the unrighteous are experiencing fire and crying out for mercy. So for a Christian, a Jewish Christian, it makes perfect sense that when the soul who has been redeemed by Christ dies, if there's need for some kind of purification before they can really enter into the joy of heaven, that's going to take place. And there are plenty of passages that we can point to in Scripture that would allude to something like this, but no need to spell it out. It's perfectly reasonable from a Jewish point of view.
And that is so intriguing. And I think I've recently read something from St. Thomas where he's given a physical analogy between the state or the destination of the soul at death and the body, and specifically in terms of gravity.
Uh-huh.
And he said that a soul that is unimpeded by sin, that's just full of God's grace, without serious taint of sin, is going to rise through the air, rise up to heaven. We might think like a hot air balloon where instead of a helium or some kind of gas, it's God's grace, God's charity is so full, there's nothing weighing it down, it's going to rise to heaven. But a sin that's mired, weighed down with mortal sin is not going to rise, it's going to descend into hell. Well, most of us are probably going to still have God's grace, hopefully if we do not die in mortal sin, but there will be venial sins, there will be sins that we've been forgiven for, but we haven't completed our penance. And those are going to be the things that will hold us down, kind of like the weights on a hot air balloon. But through purgatory, we're going to be purged of those. We're going to be cleansed and purified. So we eventually will reach heaven. So every soul that's in purgatory is on their way to heaven, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And Kevin, that's such a good point to bring up, because purgatory, Catholics aren't saying this is some middle ground, like a second chance for people to reach heaven. Purgatory is for souls that you're already in a relationship with God. He is your Father through divine adoption, but that something needs to change in you before you can really enjoy heavenly life. I mean, I've used the image before of, the sin in our life, the sinful inclinations. It's like having our hands tied behind our back. In purgatory is the Lord breaking those bonds, and we can embrace him and our brothers and sisters around his throne. Purgatory is the antechamber of heaven. You're already beginning to enter in that. Think about how the Epistle to the Hebrews says, our God is a consuming fire. Well, when our God takes hold of us, initially, his fiery presence, it burns away whatever impurities are still there. And for us, we experience a certain amount of discomfort as that's burned away. We experience part of that discomfort when we do an examination of conscience and see ourselves through God's eyes. There's some discomfort there. But the Lord burns that away, and heaven is when his fire enters into us and catches us up fully into his life. I loved how one of the saints even speculated that the fires of hell, that's actually a soul who is closed to God's life, closed to his fiery love, but God is still holding them in existence, holding their soul in existence. So for them, his fiery love is experienced as pains, the fires of hell, because they're rejecting him. The soul in purgatory is experiencing that love entering into them, burning away, and the soul of heaven is a light with divine fire. So beautiful insights there. I think it just shows really the majesty of this teaching, the beauty of it. Ideally, I suppose most of us should desire, in a sense, to experience purgatory to please God. We don't want to taint. We don't want to appear in his presence tainted. Like when we go to some important event, we don't want to go there dirty. We want to be at our best. We want to transform ourselves, and purgatory gives us that opportunity. Yeah. God's cleansing fire does that for us. So when we meet God, we'll be ready to experience that eternal beatific vision. That imagery you shared of being dressed properly, we think about the gospel readings. Christ talking about how you're dressed for the wedding, and those who aren't clothed properly being kicked out. C.S. Lewis, our Anglican brother, he drew a similar imagery about purgatory. Why don't we close out today? There's a quotation from Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger in his book Eschatology. And, of course, he went on to be Pope Benedict XVI. So I'd like to end on this. It says, purgatory is not some kind of supra-worldly concentration camp where one's forced to undergo punishments in a more or less arbitrary fashion. Rather, it is the inwardly necessary process of transformation in which a person becomes capable of Christ, capable of full life in God, capable of unity with the whole communion of saints. Simply to look at people with any degree of realism at all is to grasp the necessity of such a process. What actually saves is the full assent of faith. But in most of us, that basic option is buried under a great deal of wood, hay, and straw. Note he's quoting from Paul in 1 Corinthians 3. Only with difficulty Can it peer out from behind the lattice work of an egoism we are powerless to pull down with our own hands? So it's the work of grace. Man is the recipient of the divine mercy, yet this does not exonerate him from the need to be transformed. Encounter with the Lord is this transformation. It is the fire that burns away our dross and reforms us to be vessels of eternal joy. So thank you for joining us today on the Faith and Reason Show, and we hope you'll come back soon.